All right, and now joining us on this episode of FTFC, our first recurring guest, Jelle Koyman. Jelle, thanks for being back on with us.
Thank you for having me once again. I'm excited to be that first recurring guest.
So Jelle, Frank has been on with us not too long ago. He was on episode 21, where we kind of shared his credentials. You can listen to that episode. And we also talked about the Maverick Mental Training Program. Jelle, how's that going?
It's going very well. When we talked last time, we were sort of at the end of the first phase, doing the imagery. However, now we're at the end of the second phase, which is all that we're going to do for this year. So all the athletes have been doing self-talk for the remainder of the season. So it's really exciting.
And what's been the biggest hit with the kids? What's the most popular theme or activity you would say?
Especially in the self-talk, I think it's serving. Everyone identified that as one of the things they can work on, and been hearing quite a lot of good self-talk cues that athletes have started to use on their serving routines.
Yeah, it's not a surprise, Frank, that's kind of popular. I've been reading the book that Jelle suggested or recommended
during Life Sport.
Exactly, by Jonathan Fader. I'm right in the middle of it. I'm loving every page of it. And he's talking about self-talk in the chapter I'm reading, and he's basically saying that we're doing it anyways. We're always kind of visualizing and doing self-talk anyway, so might as well kind of...
Question is, how well are we doing it or
exactly.
not?
So how more positive or efficient we can be with that. Is that something that you're trying to explain to them? Or
Absolutely. When we talked in the beginning about self-talk, we made the distinction between planned self-talk and automatic self-talk. And we haven't really touched upon the automatic self-talk because there's not that much you can do about it. What we're trying to do is come up with plans for strategic self-talk, for planned self-talk, for athletes to use at certain times in certain situations that have a particular meaning and trying to achieve a particular outcome based on that meaning and that cue.
Is it mostly for error management or before big games? Or?
Well, I was going to say, right, the fact that serving came up as a popular choice, I mean, I'm not surprised, right, because it's a moment where you have the ball and it's automatically going to be thinking. So it's a great spot to do that. But I thought that more self-talk would have been scripted around error management because, I mean, there's so many error opportunities in volleyball and we see so many players, unfortunately, down spiral through errors.
Yeah, I think the correction of the error is a big thing. What athletes are talking about, how do I deal with making an error? But one of the things that I really pointed out with the athletes as well is that self-talk is a great skill that you can use to avoid that first error in the first place, right? We often talk sort of about that first serve of the set or the game that isn't really the same as all the other serves. You need to get going. Yes. And a lot of athletes have a tendency to talk to themselves after they made that mistake. And by planning the self-talk and by really focusing on what am I trying to do, we're trying to avoid that first mistake.
I like that. I think I would coin it planned self-talk, like you say, which is great, instead of default self-talk, right, which we do after the boo-boo.
Is it tough to get athletes to share what they're actually telling themselves, to be honest about that up front?
Some athletes obviously will be more keen to share what they're doing than others. What I'm mostly trying to do is tell them, like, you're going to tell yourself things anyway. Let's just try and make sure that we all know that you know beforehand what you're going to say. So I don't really get into the negative self-talk that some athletes might tell themselves too much. I just try to beat their negative thoughts by putting in place other thoughts and other cues before that even happens.
I like that. Don't think of a pink elephant. We always say that, right? And the first thing that comes to mind is a pink elephant. So if you're going to talk about the negative self-talk, it's going to rear its ugly back,
Exactly.
So might as well do it that way. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
We're going to have, an opportunity to dig deeper in this first year of MMTP. But since you were on the show before and I don't think we should do your bio, we thought maybe we could do a different game. In the first show, we discussed a bit how mental preparation is great in gaining ground, we feel, in sports in general, in volleyball, but there's still a fair bit of work left to be done. And And so we need to break down a lot of perceptions, be them good or bad, and we need to change this. So we thought that maybe we could ask you some of the myths, explain them to you, and then you as the expert, Yella, could perhaps chime in on it.
Yeah,
how does that sound?
That sounds great. I'm looking forward to that, because those are the things that I assume are mostly I come across a lot, and I try to explain to people. So
and I'd like to kick it off to you, if you don't mind, because there's something I have been doing forever, every year. I'm a big mental prep guy. I did a human kinetics degree, and I did a couple of sports psych classes. I read, and I'm a big believer. I was a tennis player for a long time, so self-talk and mental skills in tennis is huge. So at the beginning of every year, early in the year, I do the super cliche, what percentage of volleyball is mental to my athletes? And so we're looking at, over 50 teams there over the last 20 years, because I do many teams at school and club and some in the summer. And I've yet to see a team, even, my least cerebral bunch of young boys that I might have had at some point, I've yet to see a team give me a percentage below 60%. Most of the time, it's between 70 and 80%. So there you go. Here's the, I guess, truth or myth I have for you. Sports are at least, 70, 80, or 90% mental. You pick the percentage that you think is important. I don't think it makes a difference. What do you think?
So that's a tricky one straight away, because if we take the example of our Mavericks team, yes, 80% of the difference in the performance they're going to show is going to be based on the mental aspects in their sport. Does that mean that 80% of or 90% of sport is mental? Absolutely not. And the reason for that is there's 4 aspects to every sport. Doesn't matter what sport, doesn't matter what you do. You have physical aspects, you have mental aspects, you have tactical aspects, and you have technical aspects. All 4 of them are equally important. Now, if we look at a Mavs player, what are the things that they practice on a weekly basis? Technical and tactical, a lot in practice. As a coach, when I'm on the court, that is probably 80 to 90% of my time is devoted to those 2. Right? I work on reps. We work on reps, and we work on systems and whatever, all these things. And then they go to capital strength twice a week, so they work on the physical aspect. And that's it for most players, right? Yes, we have the mental training program, and they've started working on that in the Mavericks club, but that's compared to the amount of time they spend on the other things.
If
it's
we
a limited
did the
amount of
math
time.
equation, I was going to say, not
so
a significant
what happened?
amount.
So what happens when an athlete shows up at a tournament is that they're prepared physically, they're prepared technically, and prepared tactically. But they're less prepared mentally. So now what is the thing that is going to influence their performance the most? The mental aspect. So what I'm trying to say is, if you would spend an equal amount on mental preparation as you would do on physical or tactical or technical preparation, it would not be that high of a number. But in reality, for most teams, that's not the case. So right now, yes, I think a very big percentage of the performance is based on the mental aspects of sports right now.
All right, my turn. As a coach, I should only do mental preparation if my team or if my athletes are mentally weak. Yella, if I have a bunch of gamers, I don't need to do mental preparation because they're already mentally tough. How about that?
This one for me is always a little bit easier to answer, because I can answer it with a question back. If you get a team into your gym that is absolutely amazing at passing, do you stop practicing passing at all? Like completely?
I won't practice it as much.
There's your answer. If you come in with a team that is mentally really strong, you probably won't spend as much time on the mental prep as when a team comes in that you feel like needs a lot more preparation in that part. But you're still not going to just throw out of the window.
I see.
Right? We're talking about the mental aspects of sports as mental training, just like physical training or tactical training. So you identify what parts the team can improve on the most, and that's what you focus on. So if you have a very, very mentally strong team, you probably spend a bit less time. If you have some athletes that need a bit more guidance in that department, you spend a bit more time on that.
All right, fair enough.
Next one. Mental preparation is only for elite athletes. You need to have reached a certain level in the sport before you start to do that, and it's worthwhile.
I think that's a myth that is hard to really tell how much of that is true. When I look at the younger teams that I'm working with, a few 14U and all the 15U teams, they're great. They understand everything that I'm doing with them, and they work just as well with it as the older teams. And they have another 3 or 4 years of MAVs before they graduate from the club and go on, hopefully, to the next level. So, no, you don't have to be an elite athlete. You can start as a younger athlete. Will the focus be different? Probably. You'll focus more on being able to reflect and communicate and other skills like goal setting and stuff like that. Once you get to the more elite levels, it becomes really fine-tuning things through pre-performance routines, finding the exact self-talk, etc., etc. So, no, it's not only for elite athletes, but it will look differently for elite athletes.
Right.
All right, myth number 4. Mental training requires long hours of training to see any positive effects.
I mean, yes and no. I'm not going to say that mental training is a quick fix that within 20 minutes of an athlete coming into a session with me, I sent them back out and that's it.
Okay, well, let me spin it this way.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say I'm heading to championship season, so maybe I got 2 more tournaments, but they're the most important tournaments in my season. I haven't really touched on any of the techniques so far, but now I feel I need that extra edge. Is it too late to start now, or can I kind of give him a couple of little things that might help?
You can definitely give them a couple of little things that can help, for sure. There's quite a lot of different smaller techniques that you can use to, for instance, replace certain negative thoughts during competition. Those are quite quick things that you can teach people. But I do want to advise people, if you really want to mentor and to train mental strength and mental ability, you'll need, just like any other skill in volleyball, you need more time. Can you get a quick fix for somebody on his serve to get them into a particular smart location to serve there? Yeah, probably in a few weeks. Do you really want to work on the technical aspect of getting a good serve? And you need more time.
Yeah, I don't think I would change my offensive or defensive system, say 2-3 weeks from provincials, right? So to me, that's the same. Maybe a small addition, but certainly not a big concept. Makes sense. All right, myth number 5. All sports psychology techniques work equally well for all athletes and all performance issues.
This is, I think, the one so far that is just not true. Every athlete is unique. Every athlete has their own performance issues, has their own ways of dealing with these issues. Things can depend on whether they're introverted, extroverted, whether they have a broad or narrow focus. There's all kinds of theories and techniques that are behind that, and how you should really personalize the training you do with these athletes. What I do believe is that athlete can reach the same endpoint. Just the way they get there will be different.
Myth number 6. The core of mental preparation is visualization and positive thinking.
So visualization and positive thinking are very important factors in mental preparation, but tying a little bit into what we just talked about, it really depends per athlete. I think those are 2 essential skills that if you have a long-term mental training program, you should always address these 2 things. But there's also a lot of other aspects that athletes might need to work on that are very useful. think about things like emotional intelligence, communication skills, reflecting skills. How do I deal with adversity? But also sometimes, how do I deal with about to achieve something really great? There's people that have a fear of winning as much as there are people that have a fear of failing. Right. So yes, I would really say that visualization and positive thinking are essential parts of any mental training program, but it's not only that.
It's a good place to start, but there's more to it.
Exactly.
Right, one last one. Mental training fosters the athlete's dependency on the mental performance consultant. And I've seen this, not literally, but I can tell coaches that are not pro mental preparation often quote this as, oh, it's like a crutch, like now they need it all the time.
Really? Okay.
I think this really depends on what kind of mental performance consultant you work with. Just like any coach or any athletic trainer, the way the mental training or the training in general is presented determines how self-sustaining the athlete will be in their behavior, right? We often talk about empowering people to do things rather than telling them to do things. Transformational leadership versus transactional leadership. And that's the same for a mental performance consultant. If I go around and tell the athletes, at this moment you have to do this, at this moment you have to do this, at this moment you have to do this, and just give them a list of situations and solutions to that situation, if they then encounter a situation they haven't encountered before, it's most likely they're going to come to me and say, what do I do?
Yeah.
But if I turn it around, and that's what we've been doing in the mental training program, and ask them, what are situations you struggle with? How do you think you can deal with that? What do you think are good solutions to that? Then we work on enforcing that process of problem solving in the mental training department that makes that the athlete is not really dependent on the mental performance consultant.
In your personal experience, I guess, you're saying you haven't really seen this kind of athlete develop a dependency. It's more an empowering.
Yes. I would say that 95% of the mental performance consultants that I know and that I have worked with and are my colleagues and I discuss my work with have the same understanding about this and do things the exact same way. There might be one or two out there that are very much strict and just say situation A, answer A, but I haven't really seen any of those yet. So,
well, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully, it clears up some thoughts, some perceptions about mental training. It's clear that all three speakers right now firmly believe in the value of mental preparation, and hopefully, we're doing a good job at educating you and convincing you to integrate it more with the coming years. Let's go back to the Maverick Mental Training Program. Last episode with Yella, we discussed the first segment that was on visualization. And in the intro, we discussed a bit this second segment that you've done with our athletes on self-talk. So just as a general question, what are some key takeaways from your first year working with the Mavs athletes?
Well, first of all, that I am very impressed with the level of understanding that every single athlete brought to the classroom sessions. I think overall speaking, the self-talk was maybe a bit easier for them to understand because it was a very applied thing. It was during their practice. It was a bit easier for them to start working with it. But a lot of the sessions revolved around athletes having the ability to ask themselves critical questions and answer them and base their behavior and their actions based on that. And I was very happy that every athlete had the ability to do that. Whether that is if they've learned that those skills in school or at the club or in any other setting, that made that the program could be very successful. Some other things is that if we're talking specifically about the self-talk that we've been doing for the last period, is that the athletes really learn a lot in terms of what is a mental skill and how can I use this. I think a lot of athletes, after the first session had ideas of like, oh, I'm gonna do it then, and I'm gonna do it this way, and whatever, and then came back the second session, and I heard a lot of like, that did not work. Like I tried doing it like saying a cue between when the setter send off the ball and I hit the ball. Yeah,
Self-talk during a rally.
Self-talk during a rally.
During a hitting approach.
During a
next
hitting
level,
approach,
yeah.
and they're like,
Yes.
and some athletes are like, and then I forgot to like swing my arms, or
It went off my head and
yeah,
got a head kill.
But what was really good about that was that I realized that they actually went out and tried what they wrote down. And they tried it and realized, oh, wait, this is not how it works. This is not how I can use it. So in the end, I think I would say that most of the athletes came up with cues that they use in between points or before or after a match or tournament. There are still some I know of that do it during a rally in terms of like defensive positioning or something like that, which is very possible.
If it's like one short word, right? Like especially on defense when the ball's on the other side, I can see that.
Yeah. So that was, but that gave me a good feeling that everyone was understanding what we're doing. We're really executing it, and they came to a conclusion of how to use this self-talk. In the end, everyone walks away with about 2 to 4 situations in which they're going to use a cue, and hopefully they'll keep doing that throughout the rest of the season. And that will really help them stay focused, increase their performance, feel more motivated, be more confident. All the things that I talked about with the athletes, and they also reported that they started feeling those effects. A few athletes that started using a cue where they physically told themselves that the server was going to serve at them. So basically, like there were cues like "come at me" or "my ball" or "my day," like those kinds of cues, and they're like they were reporting like, I feel so much more calm and confident when I'm in serve receive because I'm just constantly telling myself that. So that was really nice.
It doesn't have to be a technical cue all the time.
No.
Right?
The technical cues helped a lot, and you obviously see those a bit more with the younger teams where they still are working on their technical things.
Yeah.
We did also talk about, should you use technical skills and a skill that you're really good at already. And the thing is, if you start opening up automated processes, then you might actually disrupt some things. So if if your serve is pretty much set technically, if you then start saying like right foot in front or shoulder high or something, you might actually disrupt that process and might actually not help. So we talked about that, and I really saw the difference between the younger teams where that was more prevalent and the older teams where that was basically not happening anymore. They were really about focus, motivation, confidence.
Can you remind our listeners how many times did you see every Maverick athlete in the program?
So throughout the entire season, I've seen every Maverick athlete 6 times.
Every HP.
Every HP.
Yeah.
And some additional teams.
That's right.
Yeah. So I've seen everyone 6 times, and they've worked 3 of those sessions on the visualization and 3 of those sessions on the self-talk.
So you saw them team by team, work with them. Any adjustments you would like to make for next season?
So obviously I would really like to extend the program, have more contact with the athletes, and mostly be able to have more regular follow-ups. I was very happy with the way the skills were put in place, but at that point, obviously, the more often I see athletes, the more able I am to keep reinforcing what we're doing and be able to adjust where necessary. In the same way that once you've introduced a certain way of playing, you want to reinforce it, at least every other week to keep that kind of thing going. What I really liked was, like I said, it opened a lot of eyes for a lot of players. I heard the comment like, I was always told to do this, but I never really know how, quite a lot. So I think that was really good for athletes. It made them aware of what this training is, and that it is training, and that there are skills and not tools. I think that was really good. What I would, in a best case scenario, what I would love to be able to do is to unload some of the mental preparation from the coaches. As a coach myself, I noticed that we already have to do a lot of things.
Yeah.
We're in charge of all kinds of things, from, finding the right hotel to whatever. Like, everything needs to be coordinated with parents, with players, with whatever.
Your staff, yeah.
Yeah. So on top of that, to then also do practice planning and etc. and do mental prep, I think that's, really hard. I would love to be able to unload coaches from that duty a little bit, not because I don't think they can do a good job at it, but because I want to take that away from their hands and be able to also start focusing with these athletes on reflecting and asking yourself the right questions and updating your goals for the next part of the season, and really start diving deeper into that. I've done that with some soccer athletes before, and they started really appreciating those sessions and being able to let out their feelings and as a team work towards solutions for certain problems. So that would be great.
That being said, for this year, you're done. You won't see the athletes anymore. What can coaches do to ensure athletes keep using and refining what they learned this year? So visualization, self-talk skills, and we're talking about the most crucial part of the season.
Yeah, well, the older teams have like 6 weeks ahead of them, right? They're X weeks from provincials, and then there's almost a full month. So there's still, a good chunk.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, obviously simple reminders go a long way. Just as a coach, to remind your athletes that they have these two tools in their toolbox and are able to use it and to use it to their benefit. Every athlete is and should be aware of what the benefits of each skill are and when and where they can use it.
Could you be just a bit even more specific on that? Yeah, like when you say, reminders, like at the beginning, at the end of practice, through an email or a text, or at tournaments at certain time. Like, when do you think are good times to do that?
Absolutely. So for the self-talk, since that was the last thing we did, and athletes are still some athletes are still figuring it out and making it part of their play, I think every start of the practice is a great way to remind players. Just a simple reminder saying, for everyone, just remember to use the self-talks when you have written down that you were going to use the self-talk. They have plans, and in those plans is, when am I going to use it? Like, what kind of drills am I using it in? And am I using it for the entirety of the drill or just for certain parts of it? And so they're all aware of when they're going to practice it. They might just need a reminder that self-talk is a thing that they should or could be doing throughout the practice. For the visualization, I think what is great, our great moments for that is leading up to tournaments is always really good. So in the car, the night before, all those kinds of things, and really to use it to prepare yourself to know what environment you're going to be in, what the situations are going to be, and make sure that once you go and step into the gym where you're going to play your next tournament, you have already gone through all the situations that you're going to face. So nothing that you're going to meet that day is going to be new or going to be scary or whatever. So I think in terms of visualization, remind them a few days before the tournament, start thinking about what it's going to look like and start preparing that way.
All right, so something I'm struggling with, and I'm curious to hear your answer on it, is, so most coaches spend a considerable amount of time seasonal planning, and it's putting in the competitions and figuring out mostly technically and tactically what we're going to do, and maybe a bit physical preparation, but in our club we kind of leave that off to capital strength. Like, what should seasonal planning look in regards to mental preparation?
That's a very good question, and I think that there's not a lot of guidance out there on how do you incorporate that in a seasonal plan. What I like to tell people is, like, just like any other skill, you would go from acquisition to refinement to execution, right? So, so let's say we take a very complicated mental skill or mental ability as an example, flow state. Flow state is you lose all concept of time and space, and you just play, and everything that you touch turns into gold. You're just feeling it.
Okay.
And any athlete that has experienced it any time in their career knows exactly those moments. Like I know I have two in which they experienced it. It was just, you don't know why, but everything just worked.
Yeah.
So let's take that. Okay, so this is a very advanced ability, and it's not something that everyone is able to control. So in the beginning of the year, when we talk about acquisition, you could start working on discovering what kind of circumstances have led to flow in the past, and start experimenting with a few characteristics or things that you can adjust to see what works for you. Once you've sort of done that, you can go and find strategies to recreate those kinds of emotional states, levels of mental activation, all kinds of things like that you identified in that first part.
Yeah.
Once you've done that, then you go, okay, so how are we going to duplicate this using, pre-performance routines, things like meditation, psyching up, psyching down, breathing techniques, all kinds of things, the whole toolbox you can use. And then in the last phase, you would try and fit that all together and practice it as much as you can and be able to use that flow as much as you can in competition. So when you set that out in a year plan, you can say, okay, so in the first part of the season, we're going to let athletes experiment with this. Experiment with, playing loud music before a match, playing slow music before a match. Like all these kinds of things.
You never know, yeah.
You never know what's going to work. But what's important with that is that you have to realize that if you're going to experiment and if you're going to let them experiment with this in the same way that, you let players experiment with different serves and different attacks and that kind of thing, you might run into some performance drop in the beginning.
You might fail.
It might fail, but you're experimenting.
Yeah.
That's why you have that first part of the season, the acquisition part, for a team or for an athlete to figure out what works for them. And then you go into and refining that. So I think, and in any skill, this is not just for flow. This applies to anything. If you just want to put that into your year plan, take a time in the beginning to let players figure out what works for them, let them explore the skill, and then go and narrow that down.
Build it up, yeah.
To the end of the season.
You guys are talking about seasonal planning. Part of it is the off season. We have off-season physical training, very popular.
Right.
We offer technical in the off-season clinics, and athletes get to refine certain things. I've never heard of off-season mental training. Is that a thing, Yella?
Absolutely. Actually, in most sports, you would do the bulk of the mental training before a season.
Really?
However, because our volleyball season is so long and so tail heavy, right? The important parts are at the end.
Yes.
Basically, as you go further into the season, the tournaments become more important. It's not the most important factor to have everything done before the season. Not like, for instance, if you play in a soccer league where the first match is worth just as much as the last match, right? If it's not a tournament-based thing and it's just a competition, if you play an opponent every week, then you need to be ready straight away. So what I would do for our athletes in the off season is start focusing more on the soft skills, on the soft mental skills, things like reflection skills, emotional control, and emotional intelligence things, communication skills. So for instance, a good example is emotional intelligence. That's a factor that's been linked to performance quite a lot in research right now. And it's basically the ability for somebody to assess somebody else's emotional state. Right? So my ability to assess what Frank is feeling right now. And this is a skill that is very important for group cohesion, for cooperation, teamwork, all those kinds of things.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in the off season, because there's no pressure, whatever, you have the time to Frank and I go and play some beach, and we end up at the end and we win or we lose. And now I have the opportunity to ask Frank.
If you lose, you'll know if Frank is pissed.
Ouch.
You'll know.
Can you feel the
There you
love?
go. So now I have an opportunity, because it doesn't really matter. It's the offseason. I can just ask him, what were you feeling throughout that match, and really work on those kinds of skills that I can then take into the season and use to be an effective team player, to be an effective at controlling my own emotions and all those kinds of things. So for our athletes, start, asking questions. Start talking to people about communication, emotions, all those kinds of things. Because during the season, you might not have time for that.
So would that be, I'm a 15U, 16U coach, season's over, now it's the off season. Like, would you get them together every other week, or like how what would that look like, you think, from a structure perspective?
Yeah, it's pretty tough to do a follow-up during the summer. Like, I love the idea, but is it realistic? Or like, you can't just give him a book to go read and do work on your own.
Really hard.
Yeah.
No, you can definitely, if you have the ability to get them, together once every 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and discuss these kinds of things and send them out with assignments, that would be great. The other thing, of course, nowadays we have so much ability to stay in contact with people electronically. I think that's a great thing too. And it also comes down, and that's something that is maybe overlooked sometimes as a mental skill, and that is something that takes time and practice, is determination and motivation and willingness to work for things when the pressure isn't high is very important. And this is a great time to actually take a step back as a coach, not be on your players all the time, talking to them in person. You need to do this, you need to do that, we need to work hard. No, take the step back, give them stuff to do, and see how well they can actually execute it. Because, in any high performance environment, when you get to the competition day, all the work is done. You need to do all the work before. So take it as a example and as a practice of, how determined am I to work on the things that I need to work on. So maybe actually taking a step back and only having a meeting every 3 weeks or just through email or something is actually a good thing for these athletes.
Certainly something to ponder. I know there's the OVA trout window and some of these dates that we need to respect, but to me it's the same thing as physical preparation or technical development, like you were saying, T. I think maybe with the coming years some products will come out and we'll build on that. So what I'm hearing is it's very similar to the other elements. And in championship season, you shouldn't be adding some major stuff, maybe some minor individual tweaks, if that. So let's dig into that. It's championship weekend, it's coming up. Let's say we're a week away. What should an athlete do, in the week prior to the big event?
So what I really believe in is that preparation is key, right? True confidence only comes through knowing that when you arrive on that day and you step onto that floor, that you have prepared for everything that is going to be thrown at you. That's really what confidence is. Confident people don't exist. Prepared people exist, right? And prepared people are confident. So how does an athlete really prepare for, a major competition? What I think is that a lot of teams focus on creating an environment in which everything is perfect, in which everything is correct and everything goes the way I expected it to go. But I think we all know that that's actually never going to happen. None of your successes are perfect. You always run into some kind of adversity.
Absolutely.
And what is good about this, and this is from the Chinese Olympic team, they actually use the reverse. They say, let's focus on what can go wrong and prepare for that. Because if everything goes right, we don't need to really prepare because everything went right. So, what do we need to prepare for?
Well, that's very stoic, but is that for the coaches or for the athletes as well? Because I feel like it's the coach's job to expect the worst and prepare for that, but you want the athletes to go through that as well?
Absolutely. I want athletes to start thinking and start preparing and coming up with coping strategies to deal with the things that might not go the way they want. If you keep hitting every ball onto the floor, you don't really need to think about changing anything.
I thought visualization was all about, seeing yourself having success and being on fire in the zone and all that stuff.
Yes, and you're completely right. Once you get there, you should just focus on trying to get all the positive things. But what I'm talking about is, so first you think about, okay, so what are some things as an athlete that can go wrong? Well, for some athletes, this might be forgetting to bring my shoes is something that some athletes do. And that's just something that can go wrong for them.
Correct.
Right? So if they think of this in advance, they can deal with it, come up with a coping strategy, making maybe 2 weeks before they make a list of things they need to bring. Okay, great. Right? So now we have already avoided some kind of stress or some kind of thing that can go wrong. And this is how you can sort of, as an athlete, think about these things. And actually, by preparing for things that go wrong, on the day you can focus on all the things that are going to go right.
And it can be volleyball related. Like, say I'm getting served at, or I have a tough matchup, or I make three quick mistakes or something like that.
What are you going to do when you get subbed off in the middle of a set? If you don't prepare for that, and you get that at the tournament, and you don't know what to do, that's when people
kick water bottles.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Right, but if
it's a solution,
I would never do that.
It's a solution. Water's gonna splash. People are gonna be refreshed.
It's right there.
Yeah, but if before the tournament you thought, you wrote down and you sat down and you say, okay, what am I going to do if I get subbed in the middle of a set? And you say, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the assistant, ask the assistant why, go to the end of the bench, take 3 deep breaths, and then stand up and support my team from the back of the warm-up zone. If you already know that, you have already dealt with it, and maybe it won't happen. You won't have to do it, but this way you're prepared for what's going to come.
And so how does the athlete go about doing that? You just simply reflecting, so like mentally, or on paper, writing down stuff, or through conversation with teammates or the whole team? Do we provide them with like a list of some potential issues that could come up? I don't want to say like these are the only ones, but maybe to spark them to do that. Like, I'm just trying to think of how you can put that in place.
Yeah, I think you can definitely, if you have the time for it as a coach, you can do this as a classroom session. Put athletes in groups of 2 or 3. Maybe make a list of examples, or just tell them some examples. I always advise people to write anything down that in these kinds of strategies, because you do forget them sometimes, and writing them down just makes it easier to remember, even if you lose the paper afterwards. But yeah, sit them down and make them spend some time to prepare for these kinds of things. And this again comes down to, we already spend a lot of time on court preparing technically and tactically. We already spend a lot of time in the gym preparing physically. But we don't spend that much time in the classroom or just sitting down somewhere preparing mentally. And this is a part of preparing mentally. In the same way that you bring the med kit for if something goes wrong physically, you bring a mental toolbox for what you're going to do if something goes wrong mentally. And I think that is something that is sometimes overlooked with the argument of we're preparing for everything to go right. Like, if we've prepared everything to go perfectly, then we don't need to have coping mechanisms. But I really believe that actually having your med kit of mental coping mechanisms is going to be way more beneficial to an athlete.
Coaches are getting ready for a big event too, right? What should coaches be doing the week prior?
So besides what I just mentioned, which I think can be a great exercise for coaches as well.
You mentioned it, right?
I think you have to prepare for mishaps, mentally or physically, injuries, counter performances. Who are you coming off? Who are you taking off the bench? Or how do you deal with ex-athlete?
Have scenarios.
Have a lot of different scenarios, and that's fun to chat with your staff, right? Because they always bring a ton of solutions.
Yeah, and that's absolutely a great exercise. The same way it's a great exercise for 3 athletes to sit together and do this. It's a great exercise for 3 coaches to sit together and do this. I think on top of that, there's a few things that we need to take into account when we are preparing, and maybe it's not a week, maybe it's 2 weeks or 3 weeks before, but in the period leading up to major competitions. I think one of the things that coaches sometimes forget is that selection moments are competitions for athletes, right? So if you
What do you mean by selection moments?
So selection moments, what I mean is some coaches have a tendency of 1 or 2 practices before, say, we're going to scrimmage today, and that's what I base my lineup on, right? So I select who's going to play or what role you're going to play based on your performance in a practice.
Okay.
Right. So these kinds of moments, and however you structure these, if you tell athletes that their playing time or their rank or their position in the team is dependent on what they do in practice, they are going to see it as a competition. And that is going to force them to peak, right? If we ask athletes to show us what they can do, you have to imagine if they really do, they show us the very best of what they're going to do, that's their peak. And they're probably not going to do that again in 2 weeks because they went over the peak, right? So what I mean with this is I want coaches to understand that the clarity about team roles and about lineups can actually help everyone to maybe be more prepared for a competition. Give them a bit of mental rest.
I love the surprise urgent server or the hope and block get in there, right? Those are 2 roles that I think coaches often just give out of the blue in provincials and nationals, or in some instance in a tournament.
Or the double sub that they haven't practiced.
The double sub, and that's the point, right? They haven't really practiced. That's what you're saying,
yes,
right? It
exactly.
needs to have happened before.
We need to make sure that every athlete knows their role and that they don't have to fight for that role up until the last practice before provincials.
Okay,
because that's going to push them to do things that we really don't want them to do a week before, right? So another thing is the good old tunnel vision, right? Coaches that once we get to this part of the season start blaming and referring everything to that one competition. You know, I think the phrase of like, if we are going to serve like this, then we're going to have a bad time at provincials. That phrase. That's a dangerous phrase, because what athletes are going to do is only focus on the performance at that practice. And in the end, you know, at basically any Mavs level, what we're really looking at in the long term is athlete development. And we want them to do well at provincials. Like any coach wants to try and win and do as well as they can at provincials. But by spicing up your practices, keeping it diverse, doing other things, and not just solely focus on that one thing and keep hammering on, we need to serve well at provincials and then just serve for an entire practice, that's just going to burn your athletes out. So keep it loose, keep it intense but diverse, and keep working on different things that your team needs to work on. And then lastly, and that's really difficult as a coach, the coaches are tasked with trying to appear like they're staying calm and in control, when we all know that if you're on the sideline and you're not on the court, it's really hard because you have some control over what happens, but not that much. So you're a nervous wreck, you know, going into finals, or when your team is behind 3 points and they're almost losing a set and whatever. So what is important for a coach is to really try and keep the coaching style and the message consistent, what they've been doing all year. If you've been subbing people when you reach 13 points all year, you have to keep doing that at provincials. If you have been, you know, if you put in somebody for serving like consistently at the end, you do that for provincials. You need to stay consistent even though the pressure for you is building as well, because athletes will be looking at you for guidance on how to deal with the pressure. And if you stay calm and you keep doing the same thing, what they are going to see is this is just another match. It's not different. It's not a different match. It's just another match, because my coach is doing the exact same thing as he's been doing or she's been doing all year. I think it's very tricky, but that's very important. And that starts at practice, right? Keep doing the same practices that you've been doing. For instance, our team on Tuesday, first 20 to 30 minutes of the practice, we just play a game. It's often not even volleyball related. We just play some ringette, or like we do something.
Yeah.
So I am going to keep doing that until provincials and until nationals, right? So the Tuesday before provincials, the first 30 minutes, you can guarantee that I'm going to play some kind of non-volleyball related game, Because if I suddenly don't do that, now I'm telling my athletes, no, it's different now. And that's really tricky for athletes.
Fair enough. Now, what should an athlete do during the 24 hours prior to the big event? And can you answer the same question for coaches?
Yeah, absolutely. So for athletes, once you get to 24 hours, I would really advise any athlete. So working on your skills, working on, improving your skills and all those kinds of things, that's done, right? 24 hours. You had your last practice. So this is the level of skills you're going to have, right?
Yeah.
Now let's focus on maximizing the result that we can get with the skills you have. And the way you do that is go over the plan. Right? Every athlete should know what the plan is going into a major competition, and make sure that you, as an athlete, go over that. Visualize it. Like I said, visualize the venue, visualize the opponent, visualize as many things of that competition as you can, and prepare. Go over different situations that are going well. What do I do then? But also situations, how do I react when it isn't going well? If you've had your plan on what do I do in certain situations, right? We've done that 2 weeks before a competition. They have a nice list. Take that list and visualize each of the things you've written down and how to deal with that. Coming back to your point, it's not necessarily preparing them for things to go wrong. It's just for preparing them to be able to cope with things that might go wrong. Really go towards setting your mind on when you step into that venue, I want to make sure that every single scenario that is possible, I've already gone over, and I'm not going to really be surprised.
Same thing for coaches, I'm guessing?
Yes, absolutely. For coaches, it's the same thing. And the addition, of course, you want to help your athletes do this by reminding them to do that, but also by talking to them and asking them, like, okay, so did you go over your situations, but also how did that go? Like, what are you seeing? What are things that you are struggling with to visualize? What are things that you aren't really able to really know or understand what's going to happen? Maybe a player that, hasn't been starting a lot of sets throughout the season, asking, what do I do if I start? Okay, now as a coach, you can talk about that athlete with that athlete and say, okay, so this is how I think you can deal with that situation, etc., etc. So the coach always has the double role of preparing himself and preparing his athletes.
Is that how you see it, Frank, when you enter a big tournament? I like to kind of remind myself to switch hats, where the teacher hat is kind of on the side, and now I'm like in full support and tactician mode. So I still think like in games, I want to, like, knowing they'll be kind of like, everybody knows what the stakes are, so they'll be very excited and animated, and they might be stressed. I want to be there to positively support them, but I also have a job of helping them tactically and understanding what the other team's doing. Like, I'm not just there to be a cheerleader, but so I'm not teaching them anything new. I'm just supporting and being a tactician. Those are my kind of keywords. How about you?
I want to say I'm trying to be similar, but I'm excessively engaged in terms of technical feedback and decision making throughout all the season. And a bit like Yellow was saying earlier, right? I try to move away from that for championship season, because now I think it's time for them to perform. But because they've been used to that all year,
you stick with it.
I find that if I drop it off to zero, then performance drops a bit too. Like so I need to find the right medium. Some athletes I can just let them go and play. Some athletes I still need to intervene in that sense. That's how I keep them in the comfort zone. So I've learned through the years that I can't totally get my teacher hat off. I still need to do it a bit. But yeah, just like you now, I'm a lot more, okay, here is all this stuff that I've learned about my athletes and my team and what works on and what not. And that's the chess part of the game that I really like, that I discuss with my assistants a lot, and just try to keep everybody in the right zone. I see myself a bit more as a mental coach at that point. Like if you see somebody that's over-aroused or somebody who's self-talk, maybe he's not good enough, right? I'm going to intervene in that way a lot more, and then just try to make the better decisions to keep the team in the best performance spot as possible. So yes, I agree with you, just with a minor tweak. Okay, the game is upon us. So, you know, just before warm-up, or the warm-up's done, I don't know what the game is upon us is exactly in time, but what happens then from a mental perspective, Yella?
I think this is a crucial time. this is a crucial time for athletes and coaches, and they should all be doing the same thing. The most important thing that you have to do in that moment is accept that whatever you've done before this, that's what you've done. You are not going to improve your performance anymore. You're not going to add anything anymore. You're not going to be better than what you've prepared for, right? Accept the fact the match is here and let everything go. And what I mean with that, I remember throughout high school and university as well, those people that in the morning of the exam, when they had the exam at 10, would like show up at 9 at the venue and
their book,
frantically go through their notes and like, but what was the answer to this? And they would get so overwhelmed with trying to cram in that last bit of knowledge, less performance, that they would just crumble on the exam because they've lost everything.
Kids still do that.
Yeah, right?
Right,
so
Frank.
the moment you wake up on the day or just before the match, you're done. You're ready. You'll have to start trusting yourself that you've put in the work. And if you haven't put in the work, you're not going to put it in today. You're too late. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I like to remind my athletes that they're ready, even if I don't believe it. Like often we are, but I mean, it's not. There's no time to doubt or anything.
No.
So I want to tell them, listen, we've worked really hard. We're good to go. Now it's time to just...
The cliche line I use a lot is, well, we know you're good at this and this, and we know you're not as good here, and here's how we're going to try to manage it. All right, let's just go and execute that, right? So I think it's we're all saying the same thing slightly differently, is, you know, accept where you are, you know, embrace what you've done up to this part, go and battle hard, and after the game we can look back and adjust for the coming year maybe.
Yeah, and one thing that I would like to add for athletes is what is a great strategy that you can use to make sure you are feeling in the right state of mind is if you have the time in the morning or whatever, give yourself 5 minutes and visualize the best performance you've ever had in your life. Go over that match, or that maybe it's just 1 point, maybe it's just one play that was just perfect, that felt like everything was right. Go over that in your mind, and that will recall some of the feelings and some of the mental state that you had during that moment that can really help you to get and mimic that onto the court. So that's another like little thing that people can do just before the match.
And I'll come back to the coach now because like I see it so often. I think I did it a lot, unfortunately. You know, when I was a younger coach, you're all hyped up too. You're pumped up for the big game. You've worked to that moment. And now you feel the need to gather the guys or the girls in the locker room and give them the speech of, you're not going to come into our home and step on us. We're going to go into the corners, work extra hard, get the puck, shoot it at the net, and break the stick on the side of the garbage and say, God damn, there, you know.
Yeah.
And do that hyping speech. But the irony is, I'm probably over the edge on my inverted U, on my activation scale, as most athletes, and now everybody's in cardiac mode, you know? So what should coaches not do in that time?
In that time, the motivational speech, it works in movies, and that's about it.
It does, though. I mean, Al Pacino, every time.
Any given Sunday.
But
my goodness.
To me, this really comes back to do what you've been doing all season, right? And the only thing that as a coach what you might want to consider, and this is something that you really have to figure out with your team, is you've known all season what the end product is, what the end level of that activation is that works for your team, right? So now it's up to you to assess whether the team is above or below that. If your team, for some reason, at finals day at provincials, all sitting in the locker room and nobody's talking and they're all on their Instagram and everyone is a bit sleepy, you might have to bust out the inspirational
It could happen. Or if you're
speech.
playing a team that you didn't think you were going to play, and now kids got to think that, you know, they're not as good, so it's going to be a walk in the park. There could be a scenario.
There could be
You're
some
right.
scenarios, but most likely they're going to be really hyped up, a bit tense and whatever. So what you need to do is know the level where your team works best and bring them to that. So that might just be a speech of, like you said, hey guys, I think we've done everything we can do. I know that we've worked our hardest in the gym, our hardest on the court in practice, and we're ready. And that might just be it. right? Show that you have confidence that they're able to deal with whatever is going to be thrown at them. If you are going to inspirational speech them, you're actually telling them, I feel like I need to add something to this situation to get you to where you need to go. Rather, if you actually say, like, I don't really have anything to say. Like, why would I say anything? You guys are ready. What you're actually telling them is, you're prepared.
Yeah.
You can be confident because we know that deep down we've done what needed to be done to succeed.
Can you give us some pointers for the talk or the moment after a critical match, win or lose? That moment sometimes, I mean, if we win, we never really meet up again, or there's big speeches, everybody's ecstatic. If we lose, nobody wants to talk, and cliches just fly all over the place. So how do we handle that?
Yeah. So my point with that is, whether you win or not, and I know this might sound a bit weird, enjoy the experience. I know that losing, it really doesn't feel great, but you know, if you lose in a match where it was close or whatever, you can still be proud of what you did, and you're allowed to savor that moment as well. Big losses have often led to championships the year after. There's a lot of athletes that said, I never wanted to feel that way. If you hide from that, you take that experience away. You can only truly be really happy about winning if you know what it feels like to lose, right? So the first thing is just the first 15 minutes after a big important match, whether you win or not, just be there in the moment. Talk to your teammates, talk to your parents, talk to your coaches, talk to the officials, talk to the opponents.
Don't shut down.
Don't shut down. Don't walk away. You put on a fight. This is sports, and sometimes we win and sometimes we learn, right? So be there, and then after 15 minutes, if you have the chance as a team, you can do this, or just as an individual athlete. I try to make people reflect using 3 questions, and one is, okay, what was I feeling throughout this and why? Right? Was I, excited? Was I over activated? Whatever. What were my strengths? What did I do well? Even if you lose, you've done things well, and those are worth from repeating to yourself or to whoever you're doing this with. And then what was I worried about throughout this experience? Because in the end, worrying thoughts is what leads often to anxiety and to anxious behavior. So just say, what was I worried? Was I worried about losing? Was I worried about getting stuffed when hitting? Was I worried about what the coach or my parents would say afterwards? And so these 3 questions could really give some perspective on, okay, what happened and what can I or what should I maybe change next time? But really don't try to talk about all these kinds of things for the first 15 minutes. Let everyone deal and just be in the moment for that time.
A lot of really good stuff, T.
Getting pumped up for championship season.
I mostly hope that it's been an awareness episode, that a lot of coaches now see things slightly differently from the mental training or preparation perspective going into championship season. If you do try some of these, please don't hesitate to give us feedback, because again, I think we need to keep growing this culture of mental preparation. It needs to be a quarter of the athlete.
Yeah.
And what are your thoughts?
No, I mean, we're lucky to have Yella. I think I'm pretty happy he came back and went deeper in the subject and talk about really specific parts of the season and even specific parts of the weekend and what to do and what not to do. And it's a lot of stuff, but if as coaches we try 1 or 2 things here and there, and we'll keep learning, we'll keep seeing what works and what doesn't work. I just reading the book personally, I'm learning as a coach, but there's stuff I can apply at work. There's stuff I can't wait to apply on the court. I'm still competing in different sports, and I think about myself as an athlete first, and I'm like, I should also teach that to my kids. But it's like it just brings another level of things you can do as an athlete, and you can gain an edge this way. So, Yella, thanks a lot for doing this again. Any last words of advice for our coaches as we head into the last stretch?
No, I think it's great for coaches to take any information that's out there, absorb it, and try it. Like we say, it's a field that is very young, and we're trying to really incorporate it into high performance settings and competitive settings, just like physical training is right now. And that means that, you know, in this part, we have some professionals working with this, but also coaches just go out and try some things. And I obviously, if any coach ever wants to try something and they're not sure about it, you can always contact me and ask me some questions, and I'll make sure to answer them to the best degree I can.
Thanks again for joining us. Good luck to everyone with their mental training and the rest of their season. On behalf of Frank and myself, thank you and take care.